Good afternoon. Welcome back to our conversation series. The theme of this conversation is class relations, its past compromises that calmed in a way class contradictions and thus softened social antagonisms. And the question is what happens now and in which way we should take this into consideration with its decline and the crisis of the welfare state, and what does this entail for racist exclusion models. And this we also want to discuss from a European perspective and from a non-European perspectives. Let me shortly introduce the three discussants to you. Verónica Gago, she's professor of social sciences at the University of Buenos Aires. She was part of Colectivos Situaciones, a militant collective actively engaging with social and political movements in Argentina, which deeply influences her work as she formulates herself. In her latest book, Neoliberalism from Below, she examines how Latin American neoliberalism is propelled not only by corporate and state institutions, but also by popular and migrant economies that assume neoliberalism as a battlefield. Alex Taek-Gwang, he has written extensively on French and German philosophy and its non-Western reception, Korean cinema, popular culture, art, and politics, in a quest to discuss today's continued importance of communist principles with contributions from intellectuals across the world, and particularly Asia. He edited a book, The Idea of Communism 3, together with Slavoj Žižek. Karl Dahlquist is a visiting postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Research on Migration, Ethnicity and Society in Linköping University in Sweden. Karl, he made a contribution to our book, Rereading Race, Nation, Class, in which he discusses structural similarities within welfare-oriented societies, the respective class compromises that diffuse social antagonisms, and with its termination referencing to new forms of racism. And this essay inspired us to host this conversation and to go deeper into the role and crisis of class compromises under current conditions. And I pass over to Karl, who will open the conversation.
Thank you, Katrin. It's working. And Manuela, thank you as well from all of us for organizing this, and to Etienne and Emmanuel and everyone else who has worked on these events. It's been an exceptional few days, and maybe we should also thank you for editing the collected works, and also Martin Hager and other editors at Argument for doing all the work. So thank you. So I've been asked to run this panel as a lively conversation, so we'll try to do that. And my role will also be to interrupt, so I will do that. It's against perhaps my personality, but I will interrupt and take questions, so I'll try to do that. Okay, so we're asked to expand on the conversation about the crisis of the welfare state and what happens with the racist articulations once the class antagonism within the welfare state is becoming more and more accentuated. And then we'll try to move into, and we'll look particularly at the question of migration in Sweden and South Korea. And then we'll move as well to the question of the women movement in Argentina. I think that's the way we have seen it. So I'm Swedish, so I'll speak about the Swedish welfare state here and the Swedish history of the nation state. And this is the place where I grew up and received my education. So it's quite close to my heart. And I will speak about this because we're asked to do it as a practice as well, not just theory, but also practice. So I will look at the end where we stand today and what is the most important kind of struggles that we're engaging with in Sweden today, from my perspective. And I will make a case for that P.O. Hansen at our research institute called refugee Keynesianism. try to get to that. So we were asked to bring a film or media to this event, and I picked a fictional version of an event in the mythology of the Swedish welfare state, which shows the class antagonism, and it's from 1931, and it's a strike in Sweden, and here is a train of demonstrators, strikers that goes towards a house in which there will be strike breakers. And at the time, the Swedish, or the employers and the Swedish state have sent the military to resolve this conflict. So perhaps we could... Thank you. So this was the last time the Swedish military was used in internal affairs. So this is kind of part of the mythology of the building of the Swedish welfare state, nation state. And after this, you might know, there was a set of agreements between labor and capital to create the universalist Swedish welfare state model with full employment, expansion of social welfare, solidarity wages, large state programs, education, health, and so forth. So now you could put the quote that I wanted as well. And this is a quote from January, January 17. So that, our Prime Minister has kind of stepped back from that comment, but it shows if it had been implemented, and it might be in the future, it certainly state a change. So this is actually the politician that made this link to Skotten in Ådalen was Mohammed Nur, who is a social democrat as well, in one of the suburbs in which they have these organized crimes. So basically, so what I want to say briefly is to say that I've been asked about the Swedish state. So after the war, the Swedish welfare state is then being built up. And from 1945 and 1985, we have this universalist, expansive welfare state in which inequality is decreasing. After 1985, it changes. We get growing inequalities in Sweden. And we get a concorded attack by the bourgeois, or the elite, on the Swedish welfare state. And we get then, with the first economic crisis in Sweden in 1992, 93, we get a lot. As I discuss in my chapter, there is a manifestation of growth of racism in Sweden. And again, the last decade. So, let me see. I was going to tell you a little bit about also the Swedish biopolitical state running up to this time, but I think they will be running a bit out of time. So I can maybe go back to that if someone has questions about that. But in short, the Swedish state, very much like the Germany, is quite a late developed capitalist state. So it has this kind of organistic conception of the nation. And then it had its biopolitical programs. And in 1921, it instituted the first race institute in the world. And in which it then tried to monitoring the population stock in Sweden. So the Sami or the Roma or the poor were then exposed to eugenic programs, such as castration and otherwise. And but after the Second World War, we shift, becomes a shifter from biological racism or genetism, and that is no longer part of the official ideology, if you like. And then we get this resurgence of racism in the early 90s. And this is then, as Sweden is faced with this reality of new racist group, neo-Nazi groups that arises, and also a political party that gets seats in the parliament. Balibar and Wallerstein's work gave a theoretical framework, his conception of race without racism without race, or cultural racism, was a way to understand this new form of racism in Sweden. So what happened then through the 90s is that as this attack continues on the Swedish welfare state, and it's no longer a universal welfare state, but it becomes the state retrieves, and we begin to implement various forms of austerity policies or neoliberal policies, as the rest of the European Union. And we begin to privatize the welfare sector, the schools and the hospitals and the medical sector. We're getting more and more of, if you like, the capitalist or the class antagonism that the Swedish welfare model was supposed to mediate is coming more and more to the fore. But that antagonism is being displaced then onto the migrants or the immigrants, which we have seen more and more. But it was among the political parties, with the exception of a new national populist racist party, there was agreement that there's agreement among these parties that we don't employ racist or xenophobic politics. And then I'm going to take us to right now. So then the refugee, or the recent refugee crisis, as it's called in Europe, happens, and Sweden opened its border in 2013. and gives asylum to all Syrian refugees. And then in 2015, we closed the borders, saying, and the argument is now couched in this welfare shyness. And this is, and I should name perhaps the scholar that I'm drawing on here as well from my center. It's so I don't take credit from the incredible empirical research that has been done at Remeso, where I work, and this is by Anders Nergård, P.O. Hansen, Simon Capre, Alexandra Ålund, Karl Ulrich Scherup, Stefan Jonsson, and others. So the argument is now towards the Swedish population is that, and towards the left in Sweden is that you want to help refugees, but then you can't have the welfare. So you're going to have to pick one. You want your heart or the wallet. And that has been the argument. And on top of that, you then have this austerity of about 20 years now, regime in Sweden that the state can't go with a deficit, but it goes with surplus. So the state doesn't spend. But on the revenue side of the matter is that the tax policies are changing. So we stop taxing wealth, inheritance, etc. So obviously the budget is shrinking at the time, and we don't distribute the social good as much as we have done before. So also the integration programs that we have in Sweden in order to integrate newcomers to Sweden no longer becomes as effective. And so this is the argument that now we're closing down our borders towards migrants. We can't afford it. And we continue this form of balanced budgets and austerity regimes. And obviously Sweden has signed up to Geneva Conventions, or the plan is that we accept refugees on refugee claims. But as we know, both I guess in Germany and Sweden, that a lot of the voters vote with the wallet rather than the hearts. But what's turned out lately is the migrant crisis. What it brought to Sweden, with bringing in the migrants, the state started to spend in all the different regions of Sweden. And this has been led to an economic boom in Sweden. So it's been a gift of microeconomics to Sweden right now. And as we're dealing with this austerity regime across Europe and in Sweden, and as this attack on the welfare state from within, from the bourgeois class or the political elite class, which have shifted antagonism, the class antagonism onto this outer inner enemy, they have shown that, in fact, they're giving us the best empirical evidence for a kind of Keynesianism right now. So I want to stress here, if as a practical, in praxis here, and that I think this is extremely important right now in this conjuncture in Sweden, in Europe, that we use this data that comes out of Remis and other places. Also against a lot of scholars within these fields that argues the opposite. So my policy suggestion would be that the Sweden is looked that you because there's a myth of Sweden as the third way, so this universal welfare state. Let's debunk that myth. There's been a civil war within on that welfare state for the last 30 years. Use now Sweden as this migrant crisis from 2013 to 15, and show that in fact the expenditure from the state level down to the provinces. And the last time I looked at Germany, there was the Swedish state on the federal level. We would not have spent more than you did in Germany, and this has really boom the economy out in the regions of Sweden. So I think that's a very, very important point to make now. The problem with that, and I will end here and I will go on to the migrant question in South Korea, is that as we have all privatized the welfare state, these large private actors in healthcare and school, are taking tax money and they're running with large profits, enormous, very big profits. So let's just, and of that profit, let's say about 100, there'll be, let me see, 100, sorry, I'm translating, it would be 100 billion they're using for advertisement in Sweden for do not put, let's not stop the privatization of the welfare state. That's more, and we have an election coming up in 2018, and this is why I'm pointing this out, because it'll be very important for the election that's coming up. Now we have a social democratic minor coalition government, but if the right-wing conservative will come into power, that this is, and they spend yearly on advertisements as much as the entire campaign budget for all these parties. So my suggestion would be for total labor unions in Sweden to spend equal amount in order to respond to this advertisement. I can go in a little bit more as well. I want to make one last point with migration and the racialization of the labor force in Sweden, and according to Wallerstein's argument in Race, Nation and Class, is that so within the Swedish universal welfare state, we had solidarity wage, how we set solidarity wages across the different sectors which was decided between the employers and the labor unions. And it's a fairly high, we do not have minimum wages, but in other countries, it'd be pretty fair high minimum wages. The Conservative Party now wants to lower that quite significantly. And obviously would run down the wages across the board. And their argument is we want to lower the wages and create non-skilled works for these migrants to get into the labor market. It's another destruction of that Swedish model. So they're racializing the labor force in that way. And I think I'll start with that and we can maybe discuss it more. But we're going to turn to but if I just make one last pointer, and I think this, just quite important, is because I think that this form new of welfare Keynesianism, as P.O. Hansen would call it, shows a form of also international solidarity, that it's good for the nation state against the attack from the right on forms of international solidarity. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
My turn? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for good talk. Actually, in Korea, Sweden is a kind of a utopia of a social welfare, but I didn't know that kind of hidden story, History actually killing a lot of people and then under that kind of death, and the social welfare system came in. You should actually come to Seoul and explain that one to our people. Anyway, so I would like to actually begin my talk with several images of what happened last year in Korea. I think in South Korea, where we faced a very interesting situation. So I want to actually bring about ideas and with actually the case we actually experiencing at the moment in Korea, South Korea. So could you actually show us some images I actually already sent you? All right, so this is what happened actually after the candle demonstration. So actually, please okay. Just show that, yeah. This is right wings demonstration. This is a democratic demonstration last year. is stepping out from presidency, is demanding, this is right wing, releasing my president, and this is right wing something. It's in Korea, right wing means Americanizer, all right? And this is a huge, actually, democratic. And this one is another, actually, the young generation's joke about their status, you know? So this is a right-wing one. You can see the right side of Trump, you know. But in Korea, actually, both progressive and conservative try to appeal to Trump to manage a Korean situation, something like that. But that's why this is very ironical the image about what actually happened in Korea. So, all right, just I start my talk about this one. There, you can see that all the image, and then please memorize that, and I will actually one by one just put it my actually the talk. So you know that actually the last year with this kind of a candle demonstration, sometimes we call the candle vigil or whatever. Normally, actually, in the Western cultural context, candle means very religious something, but in Korea, candle means non-violence, demonstration. But actually, of course, yes, it's to some point is related to religious ritual, because Catholic, priest normally lead this kind of demonstration, and then Protestant priest or the Buddhist monk also came out with this actually, the people to demand the political the agenda, something. So as you know that, anyway, just we very successfully impeached a former president of South Korea. You know that actually that she was strongman's daughter, that means the founder of a modern South Korea. And after actually we impeached our president, my American friend called me and please teach me how to impeach my actual president, Trump. So I explained that cause of Trump, we can impeach our president. Trump actually caused some chaotic space in actual American power. That's why we can actually recuperate constitutional the law against this kind of reactionary the conservative the march toward fascism or something like that. So that's what I mean. Sometimes actually international politics cause very interesting situation in domestic, the territory or domestic politics. So Trump also actually play such a role in the Korean Peninsula. You can see that the North Korea, you're gonna be soon that actually North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, this lucky man will actually meet the Trump. In May, I think I check out the news, but I heard that they're gonna meet or some, I don't know what are gonna do happen. Actually, they're gonna actually exchange a hamburger or something like that. I'm not sure. Just anyway, but all these things happened by Trump, election of Trump. But as for the American, friend a little bit, I'm sorry about this. But anyway, this thing is happened by this sort of a decline of American power across the world. So that's why just our government, the current government, is a democratic government and would have more space to drive this political situation, in their own way. So this is an interesting situation, but I don't want to actually talk about more on this sort of an international relation, which actually influenced domestic politics at the moment. I would like go to this topic, given actually where are the class relations. Actually, I already explained that this whole the candle demonstration related to such a democratic demand of a constitutional law, and that constitutional law is held by the long resistance. What happened in 1987? We normally call it is the beginning of a democratization. Of course, this actually the beginning of democratization lied in the huge massacre what happened in the Gwangju in 1980, which was done by as actually the Karl show that military dictator actually Chun Doo-hwan, and then but anyways 87 actually also this actually huge resistance is the nationwide resistance actually the made him step down from his position. And then the consequential actually election, another his henchman, actually very legally elected as president. This is actually the what happened actually after the 1980s in Korea. So anyway, these images here I'm showing are more paradoxical than they represent. This is the point. The scenes in this image seem the power of people, or politics from the root, or in democratic sense, the power from the bottom, or democratic, the power and the march, toward the pinky actual future, something, and so on and so on. But actually, these image also told us that the end of actual Korean Marxism, end of Korean leftism, as actually the Etienne here and Tony here, but very ironically, very accidentally, you actually sit on the same space. But in Korea, actually, Tony's work is stand for another movement, after the actual 1980s, and Etienne also present kind of another movement in the South Korea. So Tony actually represent the kind of extreme leftist the movement in Korea, but Etienne is a little bit perceived or received by a very actually politician, is institutional politician, and some the party activist, very friendly to actually Etienne, so very accidentally. But I'm not sure that he likes what I say. Anyway. So this actually, what I'm quite interested in, and this huge political situation, it looks like a political situation, but this ended up or turned end of radicalism. This is what I want to say. And the event made the Koreans to call themselves citizen, all right? Through this event, Korean, whatever actually the working class, farmers, or actually student, women or something, whatever actually they are, they call themselves Korean, call themselves citizen. Started to call themselves citizen, and then brought forth an interesting situation in the country with this kind of naming, citizen. So I would call what is shown with these images, in this sense, the spectacle of republicanism. Actually, spectacle is a kind of a theater. And as Etienne points out, it is the creation of a we, or within the boundary of a citizenship, and then, so that's why just the inclusive and exclusive, at the same time, citizenship of the birth of citizens comes about with a spectacle. This is quite interesting, situation we can see in what happened the last year in Korea. Is this citizen was actually given birth with this kind of spectacle. The theatrical representation of a citizen, endowed people to call themselves, citizen, something. And the demonstration started with but quite ironically, this actually the demonstration, that means actually it wasn't a candle demonstration from the outset. It transformed to a kind of demonstration because the people in South Korea do not like actual violence, something. That's why just these actually leaders, the organizer of this the demonstration should show actually they are non-violent, or some. They don't want actual violence, something like that. That's why just it turned and transformed to a non-violent demonstration, and then that's why just the candle came into this demonstration, something. But from the beginning, this actual demonstration was personally organized by a Democratic Alliance of Trade Union. That means a working class, and the workers started organize this demonstration. But this demonstration gradually occupied by so-called citizen, And then, but the citizen, as I told you, that is created later on. It wasn't a citizen. They came in some sort of a demos or whatever. Actually, the anonymous, actually something, but as you know that actually those people insist we are everyone, And then they came in very democratic democratic masses there, or multitude or whatever actually we can call them. And then they actually try to represent themselves through this demonstration citizen. And then, but that's why. But the thing is that after this demonstration, the consequence of this demonstration, quite interestingly, actually turned in the establishment of Republican government, and then removing class, or how can I say, just the minority something. You know what I mean? This is a very interesting situation. So this citizenship came in, and everybody insists, I want to be citizen. And then in this situation, if you insist, I'm a working class, I'm a worker, that means what? That means you are kind of race. That means that this actually, through a spectacle of republicanism, what happened in Korea is definitely those minority, including workers, in this actual sense, normally irregular actually the workers, something like that, or migration worker. Of course, migration worker is included as actual race already. But if you are actually the irregular worker in Korea, or so you insist I'm a class consciousness something, or I'm a leftist worker something like that, or communist or Marxist, abruptly suddenly turn into the kind of race, regarded as a race. Do you know what I mean? So that's why just it quite failed to. That means that actually the citizens believe that this race mustn't actually include it in the citizenship, as far as they agree this Republican, the idea, something like that. But what is this Republican idea in Korea? Definitely, actually, the Northern European social welfare, the state. So in this sense, actually, Korean people called this sort of the new Republican ideal country as a normal state, normal nation state. And then so this is what I want to say actually. But the thing is that what really they want to do, or they really insisted actually that during a kind of demonstration wasn't actually the abolishment of law. On the contrary, actually they insisted. That means they insisted that the former president to keep on law. You must actually follow the law. Otherwise, you're gonna be impeached. And then you can see that one lady. There is actually TV the news show, and it showed that she announced the reason why we should actually impeach our president. She seemed destroyed. The first reason was actually that she didn't follow the constitutional law. The second one is that she destroyed a market system because she got the bribery from Samsung, something like that. That's why Korean government, in the current government, released, the owner of a Samsung company, because Samsung is a kind of a market as such. Yeah. You cannot actually, the prison, the capital. You must release the capital to market, and that was the purpose. Current government, which government, I don't know, whatever government come in, they will do that. As far as we keep on to this kind of capitalism. Yeah. So, and then that's why I would like to say that what kind of political aim, the Korean democratic people had these days, in my opinion, in corporatism, something like that. In corporatism, like a European country. And then, as you said, that these actually we actually experience the decline of population, and more of these citizens, Korean new citizens, do not want to actually get married, do not want to make a family, do not want to actually follow the actual tradition, something like that. They want to invent new country, But it seems a very American style, country. But they follow the liberalism, something like that, individualism. But the problem is this kind of extreme, actually the capitalism would destroy our country forever if actually abandoned this kind of a self-cancellation process. That's why I
So
think...
you need migration.
Yeah, I think that this government, already actually the consensus happened. Lots of actually the young generation already agree that we're gonna actually open, actually open the border to a migration, for the cheap labor power, something. So this is actually what we faced that situation. And then, as you said, the class consciousness in domestic territory or domestic political situation became crisscrossed by this. How can I say? So you actually the situation.
Yeah. So then, if we, yeah,
slavery.
So we'll.
But they don't call it slavery, There's different. They pay the slavery.
Yeah. So then we'll jump maybe 1-2 decades ahead of time if the Swedish welfare state continues its neoliberalization, and we end up in Argentina. if the growing inequalities continues, and Verónica will speak about
Yes, I would like
women
to show
moment.
a very short video about the demonstration the last week, March 8th, that I have been talking about, just to repropose some questions about class that we have been talking yesterday.
Yeah.
Well,
I think we should.
well, I like very much the strong images because it's not a sad or a passive demonstration. And always the common place is to link violence against women with this state of mourning or depression. So I think this powerful image is good to contrast this idea of victimization that is always put against this idea of feminist politics. I would like just to say 3 questions to open the discussion. And I would like to take into account the concept of class politics that Wan Wei proposed yesterday. And I would like to think how this feminist emergence challenge also the classical organizations of the labor movement. I am thinking, for example, of the participation of the unions as a feminist composition in this demonstration. I think that the unions are challenged by this new feminism protagonist in terms of representation, mobilization, but also political effectiveness. For example, the feminist movement said, todas somos trabajadoras. We are all workers. So they have to reorganize the first attempt to put limits to the strike when they said, no, only unions can call to the strike. And the response of the feminist mobilization was, we are all workers, so you have to come to our mobilizations. The second point is that I think it's important to think how appears class matters related to exploitation and violence in the sense that allows to reframe the very notion of labor and putting the crisis of reproduction in the first place. I think this is also a very important point to connect different territories of struggle.
Yeah.
And the last one is how this class composition or feminist constellation that we were talking about is not anymore self-defined as minoritarian. I think that this movement and these mobilizations displace the usual opposition between massive and minoritarian, or identity and interest. But at the same time, they put minoritarian problems or vocabularies in a massive scale. So I think that this is another displacement of the movement that is taking place nowadays.
So I guess I'm going to look at the person with time, and then I'm going to say, since we utterly failed at having a conversation so far, I think that should we speak a bit, or should we also invite audience? What do you think? Should we?
I think that is 5.
What?
5 minutes, yeah.
5 minutes.
We're going over a bit. We started a bit late, so we have like. So we have, I think we have about 15 minutes.
We could open, no?
Yeah, so we have some time. So maybe we should, we apologize for this failed conversation.
So actually, yeah.
So if you want to talk to us after, we'll do so over some food and stuff. And we're very good at conversing over food, as we have exhibit over the last days.
Responding to Veronica's talk about actually feminist movement in your country, and then also the way faced up actually huge the feminist wave in South Korea after this demonstration. You know, as I explained that the working class already comprised with the actual state form, and then the part of they actually believe that they're part of actually the state. That's why they would believe that we can make a kind of a meeting table, with the government, and they actually believe that state is kind of battlefield, as I think said, and kind of, and then we need to negotiate. That's what. So they don't need to come out on the actual street, but instead of this working class, already actually they obtain their own the victory achievement, a trophy, and then through this actual spectacle, actually finished this spectacle, there was, as I told you, that very the bustling, actual power of such a minority issue. One of them was woman, the femininity and the gender inequality. So they came in. So at first time, it started with very technological support, like social network service, something like that. It was like a campaign. It's an imitation of American Me Too, campaign, something like that. It started with very small size, but it became actually the huge movement. And after some Korean woman, actually the prosecutor and the secretary, and actually the real woman is not actually the woman on the internet. Actually, they're real woman. They revealed their kind of sexual violence against them, something like that. And then it became a movement. Now, actually, this is the reconstruct whole the the geography of politics in South Korea. So it is a little bit interesting because actually yesterday Wang Hui actually talked about that. This actually economic system, the situation allowed the working class to have that kind of actually the negotiation with the state or something like that, and then the marginal actually area which was isolated or alienated from this sort of mainstream movement, actually the woman or some other the political subject actually carry on their own the voice, something like that. So this is a very interesting situation, and then we need to actually reconsider, rethink, the politics, the replacement of the class consciousness, something like that.
And you put in a quite strange context of making an economical argument for solidarity, which we're doing through the migrant question, in the sense which I was making with this refugee is more the migration that South Korea need migrants in order to have an economy, and therefore we have solidarity. We call for solidarity on this basis. Obviously, it's a very difficult place to be in, and making this kind of argument. So obviously, that's not where you would like to start, but that's a little bit how the debate and constellations are, at least in Sweden right now, and this is the reality we are since facing. So I think it's been curious to see, and maybe you can see it as well, in which a lot of the research as well in Europe about trust. Now we say it's often an argument that migrants or immigrants break down the trust regimes of our North European welfare states, and we can't, with this trust regimes, we don't trust anymore. And while the trust has been broken from within by the attack on the welfare state functions and institutions such as school and healthcare and so forth. And if I also like to point out, in a sense of Foucauldian argument, or also how this has made it, is that this neoliberalization is also subjectivization. And in Sweden and elsewhere, and under the umbrella of what's called new public management, changed the way in how these welfare institutions are run as well. And they run now on a market model in which you no longer trust your doctors, your workers, your teachers, and so forth, but they have to report back to their bosses since they're not longer trusted, and they have to fill certain quotas and so forth, as you know, with the policing in the US and other things. So you created a mistrust as well across every inside the workplace, every of these former welfare institutions as well. And now, I don't know if we can speak about the Korean case, but the conservative audacity then to say, well, it's the migrants that destroy the trust in our welfare states. So there's also a displacement taking place there. But the case of I mean, I feel a bit uncomfortable in a sense, as anything, it's a form of transition to make this kind of economic argument for international solidarity, although I think there is one to be made there against the type of Schmittian naturalism, against international solidarity, or other forms of now authoritarian, closing nationalist economies. So maybe we could discuss that, or maybe we should also begin to bring in the, so maybe you want to say something
I
in
just
this.
want to say that I think that one of the main tasks of this kind of feminism is that is a popular feminism, a communitarian feminism, a slum feminism, is to create popular infrastructure in the neighborhoods, like a kind of welfare from below, in a very concrete terms, against violence, against dispossession. And I think that this kind of network is also has a productive and organizative dimension.
Yeah, we actually see that in Sweden, in some of the northern hospital, that they're closing down because they are cutting down on the welfare. The nurses and women are occupying that hospital. Has been going on now for quite some months. So there is that kind of struggle going on as well within in Sweden, which you come up with different moods of operating. I mean, I think there's a crack in the neoliberal, both their economic theory as well as on their ideology and justification. That you can see this crack, and it's very important now, I think, to aim at that crack as hard as one can in order to show that it's no longer a justified system. And these are different levels of that struggle, I can see.
What we're facing with this day is that definitely the global capitalism, whatever actually they called, and anyway, just neoliberal, the economic system, whatever called. And the thing is that since the actually, 1997, actually this kind of globalization goes actually fastly, and then, actually, what does that kind of a financial crisis means? We need to actually focus on that one, and that is actually new situation happened. That means transformation of capitalism, and capitalism goes global, more and more. Yeah. That means that resistance, for instance, the migration issue, actually feminism issue, also that thing is happened in the America, and then that thing came to Korea, and it's transformed in different shape. Yeah. That's what I want to say. So resistance actually goes global. Yeah. More and more actually resistance will actually happen simultaneously. So what I mean, actually, domestic situation, domestic politics no longer exist. It goes more and more fastly actually united. It's generalized, but that's why just the resistance must be universal agenda.
So what we take from Sweden is the case of this refugee Keynesianism as a very, very good empirical example of non-austerity regimes works, and from Argentina, this new mood of operating politically by the women movements that seems to claim a space that was prior, if I understand it correctly, more a male labor position. And if I understand you correctly, there's the universalization. And then we should probably open up now, but maybe keep away if you could be more specific about how you can see that exact struggle to be universalized. If you can take some lessons from the Korean case, and then maybe do we have a chance for like 3 minutes or 3 questions? 3 minutes.
3 minutes to question or comments.
Yeah. So maybe apologize. So maybe we'll open up for a free comment question without answers, and then no, but we can always go and find. But so please, is there anyone who wants to add something? Okay. Yeah, you do that. There's one there and one there. Oh yeah, that's the one with the great question about Buddhism. Yeah.
It wasn't about Buddhism. I just meant in Chinese culture, Buddhism was influential, which means that people maybe have a cultural notion of detachment from their identifications. So maybe a peasant can become a capitalist and just switch his identity easier than in the West. That's another culture. But my question was also related to China. Could we imagine some kind of mixed ownership of corporations, where the ultimate ownership is considered to be public or the people, while we still need some kind of meritocracy that is basically fitted to the interest of the living beings, let's say, or at least of humans, because meritocracy and let's say some kind of gratification of your efforts will stimulate innovation and stuff. So
that's a great, and obviously that question is going on a great deal in Europe over the pension fund strikes now in England and elsewhere, and about but the second, was there one more question as well? All good.
Hi, Verónica. I wanted to ask you about something that you mentioned earlier today, too, which is the connection between these new forms of feminism as emerging from new challenges of class composition as they relate to debt. And I wondered, maybe there isn't time to speak about it now, but I was interested in these as a response to debt, and also then thinking about the rise of new right-wing tendencies as also responses to debt, but of course very horrific ones. Because if we're speaking about the atmospheres of racism and their connection to political economy, then the existential experience of being in debt, thanks to the retreat of the welfare state and the neoliberal assault. Maybe these as kind of twinned responses.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to? And then we have like 1 minute or something.
Yes, I think that the financial devices are an attempt to offer a response of the privatization. So these popular infrastructures are competing with this financial indebtedness. And I think that this is a very crucial battle struggle in terms of who provides these common resources. And the financial devices are offering, especially to women, these kind of new forms of debt, and especially to poor women. And I think that is a very central point, this kind of how to struggle against financial devices in terms of these feminist mobilizations, because it's a problem that is very present in everyday life. Now it's an abstract level. Of course, also the abstract level of state debt and how this state debt nowadays implies a lot of privatizations or less resources in programs or budgets. But I think that this is very important, this micro level of proliferation of debt and how this affects to everyday life, especially for more poor women.
Yeah, we should probably throw to. Okay, question. Okay, good. We'll keep going. And where we get in that, we can speak more about the public ownership question. Yeah. So.
It's another question. Is just a very short comment. You see the images of the women's strike and march in Argentina, and these images are really powerful. But if you think of the situation in Argentina 1 year ago, 13 months ago, well, the situation was quite tough. Yeah. The labor movement was divided. It was not able to organize a strike against the new government of the right of Mauricio Macri. The first strike, general strike against the government of Macri has been organized by the women movement. And nevertheless, the labor movement was still divided and unable to act. It has been precisely the development and the power of the women movement, of the feminist movement, that has put the labor movement again in motion. That has opened up a space in which such amazing images as the ones that we have just seen became possible. On March 8 this year in Argentina, the strike was even more powerful than last year's. The whole labor movement was in a way compelled to participate. I think this is something that says we should, think about that, because it has a value that maybe goes beyond the Argentinian instance with its peculiarity.
think we can.
Yes.
But did you want to
So
respond to the
actually,
part, and then
I want to actually respond to. In Korea, actually, private ownership is quite strong. You know, actually, more than the 40% of population in Korea, you know, doing their own business. So very similar to the America. You know, that's what I mean. Actually, we didn't have any social welfare, you know, state, and so far, and then that means Korean modernization, you know, or the economic development began with neoliberalism, because dictatorship, you know, the strongman's daughter's father, actually, the strongman definitely actually forced actually Korea to a modern state, and then his actually the agenda was to building a normal nation state. It does not mean actual social welfare state, something like that, but neoliberal, because already neoliberal went on in those days. And then you know that actually the Margaret Thatcher is actually the Etienne, you know, mentioned the boomerang effect in yesterday. That is very exact term actually to explain what happened these days in Asia and in global scale. In my opinion, actually, that sort of when Margaret Thatcher, you know, announced that we must learn from Asia. What does that mean? You must learn from the Asia. That means Asian country didn't have any, you know, experience of social welfare. You know that. But after the 1990s, through so-called democratization, this democratization in South Korea means that the end of radicalism. What happened in the 1980s? We had strong the red years during the 1980s. That's why we actually got the Tony and the Etienne's work in our context. But all this kind of the historical experience replaced with so-called democratization. What does this kind of democratization, Americanization, or liberal democracy came in? And of course, yes, actually, I don't want to actually despise the actual feminist movement and the lying on this sort of actually liberalist value, because this liberalism came into Korea as a kind of ideology, and the feminist actually the movement, the activists wanna push up this ideology at the limit, something like that. This is what happened in South Korea these days. You know, it became a little bit some sort of revealed some the moment of truth within this movement. So I don't want to despise, I don't want to criticize this movement. But the thing is that, as you said, this kind of economic structure, you know, couldn't allow them to expand their influence. Like actually, the Latin American situation, you know, working class already, you know, became a middle class. It's not actually economical middle class. They already have a citizen consciousness, something like that. They believe that they are kind of middle class, and then they want to actually be a global citizen these days.
So we should probably wrap up now, or you want one? Okay.
Perhaps a quick comment. All three of you, developed certain histories of different modalities of displacement of the category of class by other categories, perhaps migrant, citizen, woman, and yet all the struggles take reference or take relation to class struggle. And I wonder if we have been speaking about this notion of racism without race. What we are faced in these histories that you're telling is some kind of a class struggle without class. So I wonder how we can negotiate these displacements of class while still taking reference to class struggle.
Wow.
Good question.
As Wallerstein's and Balibar's work were informed into the Swedish context in the early 90s, was the concept of races without race, or cultural or differential racism. And it created a self-consciousness in Sweden of that, in fact, quite a racist society. Yeah. And as these PhD students and doing their PhDs at the time get familiar with Balibar and Wallerstein's work, they also became scholars on their own, and they were hired to do state reports, and in which they used this book to propose policies of how to deal with structural and institutional racism in Sweden. The main policy recommendation was to decrease in inequalities, in a sense, reverse the destruction of the welfare state. You're asking you're asking quite a conceptual question. Is there you're saying you said class without class. That's your class struggle without class.
Etienne want to answer.
Yeah, class
We're like
Praxis der Theorie, practice of theory.
Yeah.
No, just, I mean, two very quick remarks on that. First, I don't know if Sergei had that in mind or it returned to him unconsciously. The formula class struggle without class is in the book, in the chapter on class, in my own essay. Now, I'm not saying that because I want to claim any rights. No, the thing that I find interesting is I borrowed this formula from two well-known Marxist theorists. I mean, Petard gave us an account of some of the most surprising, I would say, shifts and reversals in the history of the articulation of theory and politics in the 20th century, evoking different schools. But in that case, the very strange thing is the two others who, more or less in the same period, would use that formula are considered to be absolutely incompatible and antithetic. This is Althusser on one side and E.P. Thompson on the other side. Now, what do they have in common? They have in common that they, one way or another, in fact, I think they are influenced by Gramsci, even if they take him in different directions, and or they use his inspiration with different theoretical instruments. And in fact, what they are trying to do is reassert a primacy of the political, so to speak, in the understanding of the category class. So what they want to say is there's no pre-existing class, not even the famous Klasse an sich. I mean, it's if you return to Marx in 47, 48, it's the basis. The class emerges, and then it becomes self-conscious and therefore politically active through overcoming the competition among workers, organizing, etc. So what they both want to explain is there's no such thing as a pre-existing latent or material group or sociological or even economic category. What there is a process of constitution of a historical subject, if you want, or agent, Althusser would probably say, rather than a subject, which is through and through a political process, and therefore it is a consequence of the class struggle. Now, the situation that you try to conceptualize, or the question you ask, and if we had time, I think that Tony's concept of the multitude is an extremely important reference in this respect, is no longer reducible, I would say, to that alternative. Either the class first, the class struggle after, or the class struggle first and the class as a consequence, etc. So the question you're asking, and I stop there, I mean, which I think is the core of many of if not all, of our debates, is how to keep more than ever a concept of class antagonism and therefore also class struggle in the center of our discussions and analyses, if only for one reason, because there is capitalism, and capitalism wages the kind of class war, if you like, that we have heard so many indications of, including the Swedish episode. But the political consequences are not a kind of purification, if you like, of the class element. They are always and always, including, of course, a class dimension that is absolutely impossible to eliminate, but never leading to setting apart, I would say, the class element and the others. Hence, the fascinating situation that Sandro was describing, reacting to the powerful images we saw, which is a situation in which it is the women's liberation movement that, in fact, produces or reproduces a form of class protagonism. And of course, the old Marxist, I would say something like, oh, how interesting. In the moment in which the labor movement was weakened, fortunately, the women, as always, came to give us a push, and they resurrected our class consciousness. No, it's not like that.
Thank you.